All right, so today I wanted to talk about fallen nature because you guys are just a bunch of sinners. No, no. The thing is, I was a topic that I was thinking about for a little while, and I thought, oh, I think it could be something we can reflect upon, especially with this question of how can we realize ourselves in a fallen world. So maybe you know this painting. It's made by Alexandre Cabanel. So a little bit of French for you. It's called L'Ange Déchu, which means the fallen angel. And he actually painted this when he was 24 years old. And you can see here this really hot guy here is actually the archangel, Lucifer, who just got fallen away from the heavens. And he was inspired by a writer, a book that was written by this guy, John Milton. And John Milton is known for his book called Paradise Lost, which is basically the story of the fall, but from the perspective of Lucifer, the fallen angel. And he tells it in such a very grand, epic way. And what is very interesting about Milton's approach is that his writing of the character of Lucifer, he writing him as this intelligent, eloquent angel who suffers and he's driven by his ego, his ambition, and his resentment. And so in this way, Lucifer becomes almost this tragic figure. And when you're reading this, you're kind of like, it turns into a mirror of our own demons. It kind of allows us to feel the seductive appeals of rebellion. And somehow it kind of like asks the question of pride and selfishness. And this sort of a tragic figure of anti-hero, have been used before, and now today we can see it with like Anakin in Star Wars or the Joker in Batman. And in the book in Paradise Lost, so Lucifer, he just got fallen from the heaven because basically he didn't recognize Jesus. And so he goes down to hell and he's full of anger and revenge. And there's this sentence that he says, well, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And this sentence sums up this Luciferian vision of the world, I think. And I think it's kind of the powerful of the great writers is that in a few sentences, they can just fully explain the heart of, I would say, like a fallen nature, the heart of Lucifer in some ways. So basically, in order to realize oneself and achieve fulfillment as an individual, one must rule and dominate, even if it means doing it in hell, rather than occupy a position of servitude in heaven. So I think it's a really brilliant summary of fallen nature, isn't it? So speaking of fallen angels, so the goal of our sermon, of course, today is to see how we can take a different path than Lucifer. And I think that's why first we want to talk a little bit about fallen nature. So in the Bible there's this famous quote, Jesus says, "You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desire." So according to the principle, what we call fallen nature is this inclination that Eve inherited from the archangel after they have this sexual relationship together. And so it's a kind of a physical and spiritual corruption that had cut our relationship with God. And so we are now children who have lost their parents. But today it can be understood a bit as a form of confusion, a disconnection from the world we live in. We're a bit like this guy sitting in, we're like, well, I'm sitting in this chair, but is it the right chair to sit on? We kind of feel like a lack of harmony and ask ourselves, well, what am I doing here? There's this deep gap within us between who and where I would like to be and who and where I actually am. But yes, we feel this potential within us, right? We have this feeling, Eden, talent, longing to emerge, and the conviction that we can turn this world into a better place, and if only we can commit ourselves fully, right? But although this desire of freedom and fulfillment reside within us, we quickly realize that freedom is likely mostly a mirage. And we are limited by our constraint and shaped by our environment. Our demons and our own limitation often takes over, and it is often in adulthood that we abandon our hopes and our childhood. So we kind of come with this realization, well, actually, it's almost impossible to fully realize ourselves. There's too much constraint. Like Paul says in the Bible, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on going. So the question is, of course, how can we fully realize ourselves and overcome our fallen nature? In other words, how can we find harmony and experience a form of transcendence despite our fallen nature? So I think to do that, we need to understand the characteristics of the fallen nature. I think it's a great illustration too. Okay, so if you want to understand, the characteristic of fallen nature and the principle, basically what you really need to have in mind is this picture. So we have to keep in mind the structure of the Cain and Abel or Archangel Adam relationship. Basically, everything rests on the idea that for Cain to overcome his fallen nature, he must unite with Abel, who is as the central figure. And he holds as a mediating position between Cain and God. So thereby, fulfilling the purpose of creation by completing the four-position foundation. So basically, Cain needs to unite through Abel to have this connection with God, and then boom, bada boom, union, everybody's happy. And I don't know if you saw this film. It's Amadeus. It's an excellent film that really portrayed well the relationship of Cain and Abel, this dynamic. And so here, I'm just going to show you a very brief editing I did of the movie. And there is two main characters, Salieri, who is the composer of the royal court, and he confronts to the young Mozart. And in this scene, the kings ask Mozart, I don't know how you say in English, to perform one of Salieri's composition. And this is how it looks like. Yes.
This is yours.
Keep it, Majesty, if you want. It's already here in my head.
What? On one hearing only?
I think so, sire. Yes.
Show us.
The rest is just the same, isn't it? It doesn't really work, does it? Or this. This. Yes.
It's not always easy to love Abel. And that's kind of exactly the issue we have, right? Okay. So, when it comes with this section of the principle, when we talk about the characteristic of the fallen nature, we have a tendency to focus on each characteristic, which is natural. But actually, what caught my attention when I was preparing this sermon is the verb chosen for each one. And you will see that there's actually this sort of a natural connection between the verbs that is used. So let's just read the first characteristic. So in the DP it says, the archangel fell because he did not love Adam. Rather, he envied Adam, who was receiving more love from God than he. This was the cause of the first primary characteristic of the fallen nature, falling to take God's standpoint. And so it's generally, if you want to have a relationship, it's a generally good idea to start by loving this person, right? And in the DP it says, according to the principle of creation, God's love is the subject of all love, flowing within the four-position foundation. So without God's love, there is no way to establish the purpose for which we were created. In other words, love is often like the very engine of every connection. And God's love is so essential that it surpasses the law of the principle. He loved Adam more than Lucifer. But Lucifer cannot overcome the jealousy that arises within him. He's like, I was God's right hand. I know the principle and the laws of heaven far better than this Adam. Why should I bow before him? And this behavior kind of reflects the attitude of the elder son in the story of the prodigal son, one of the Jesus story, who is upset to see his father throw a banquet for his younger brother, even though he has remained faithful to his father. But God's love is like that of a parent embracing their children. So to share God's love and God's perspective is therefore to love as God's love. Love is the foundation of every relationship. And that's why there's written, although God creating human beings based on the principle, he governs us through love. And there's this phrase that I think is really wonderful. It's like, for this reason, Jesus tried to raise his disciple with the truth, but it was his love that saved them. Okay, second characteristics. The archangel fell because he did not respect Adam as God's mediator and did not receive God's love through him. Rather, he attempted to seize Adam's position. This was the cause of the second primary characteristic of the fallen nature, living one's proper position. And so you see now, we love and now it's respect. And indeed, love alone is not enough. As the Buddha says, without respect, love is lost. And so we're pretty good at just loving someone, but do we really respect that person? Like I can say, I really love you, Peter, but I don't care about what you say, Like I don't really care about your opinion, Or it's like Sweden, Norway, I love you so much, but you being independent, kind of bad idea. In Denmark, you're okay. So loving someone is not enough. You have to also respect that person, right? And when it comes to living one's proper position, well, it's this attitude of, why should I have to go through you to get what I want? I know better than you, and I'm the one who should take your place. It's a bit like in Scar in The Lion King, or even in history. It's something that we have seen many times. Like, for example, in the Chinese Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong, he actually he manipulated young Chinese students who were called the Red Guards into turning against their own teachers in order for him to keep into power. So, the third one. The archangel fell while he claimed dominion over Eve and Adam, who were his righteous Lord. This was the cause of the third primary characteristic of the fallen nature, reversing dominion. So, to dominate is to impose oneself over someone else. So it's the complete opposite of unity. And, we can see this in, like, for example, Lord of the Rings, like the character of Grima Wormtongue, he dominates and manipulates the king, Theoden of Rohan. Or even just when we see a child who's completely dominated their parents, it's like, it's completely reversed. It's not, you can feel it's not natural. But when it comes to our verb, if you can love someone, you can respect someone, you can even admire him, but can we truly unite with him? The disciples loved and respected Jesus. Yes, at the moment of the crucifixion, they all deserted him. So, I may love and admire my doctor, but if my doctor say, oh, you have to stop coffee, maybe, am I going to unite with him? So, therefore, loving and respecting alone is not enough. We must unite in humble commitment with the central figure. And then the fourth one, it's multiplying evil. And the idea of multiplying evil, my understanding is that it's actually more the result of not loving, respecting, and uniting with one central figure, Abel. And even the question of evil being multiplied is not something just completely abstract. There's this maybe you know of her, Anna Arendt. She was a German philosopher, and she escaped from the German Nazi regime, and afterwards she wrote this text about the banality of evil, and basically she reflected on how institutionalized injustice normalize evil and reproduce it. In other words, structural evil generates destructive individuals' behavior. So, for example, in France, when the government collaborated with the Nazi regime, first it was just propaganda like, oh, the Jews are inferior, and then the Jews had to wear stars Everybody had to know who was a Jew, who was not a Jew. Here you can see it's a children's playground, Jew forbidden. And until, the death camp, etc. So, we accept one evil, then we're going to accept a bigger evil, etc., etc. And we have this example many times in history. So to summarize, if Cain love and respect and unite with Abel, then goodness will be multiplied, right? Amen. But, I can end my sermon here, but as a true Frenchman, and as a good Cain, the descendant of the Enlightenment and the great French Revolution, I actually always had a problem with this part of the principle. Because for me, I always felt that it was the perfect structure for tolerating a dictatorship. Indeed, it is easy to imagine that this structure could be used as the ultimate justification for imposing a way of life that doesn't align with who I am, yet that I would have been expected to follow nonetheless. Because if I complain, if I do not unite, I will be accused of being a dreadful Cain who dares to defy Abel, the central figure who is there to guide me towards my supreme leader. What becomes of my individuality, my personality? Do I not have a voice in my own life? Is uniting with Abel equivalent to completely deny myself, suppressing my own desire? Am I condemned to live a life of another? So how then can I really truly realize myself in that structure, right? So, in order to accomplish, I think we have to see it as a guide to self-realization. And I think we often have a wrong understanding of the four-position foundation, and especially when it comes to this Cain and Abel stuff. The mistake is to see them as absolute position, fixed, that is not changing. And I think actually Confucius' Chinese thought, which I believe is at the root of the idea of the four-position foundation, can help us. So what does Confucius say? Harmony is by its very nature relational. It is through mutual support and mutual dependence that things flourish. So the Confucian universe is not built on an absolute fixed foundation. It is built on an interactive network of mutually dependent components. So what does that mean? That means that in a harmonious world, positions are fluid. So they evolve. Like a child is not a child forever. One day, the child will become a parent. The same as a student is not a student forever. One day, the student might become the teacher, and therefore becoming, as a central figure. So we have to understand that Abel in this relationship is more of an intermediary through whom Cain fulfills himself. So it's a bit like Abel is like a gardener who waters the plant so that it can bloom. So a good Abel sees the potential in Cain and waters him properly. So a little example to illustrate this point. So imagine you have an artist and he's completely obsessed about his style. It's like, man, this is my style, and I just do those really flat images, and I'm not going to look at other people's work because this is their stuff, and I'm just going to feel my stuff. It's me. And, I mean, you can go, a little bit far with that kind of attitude as an artist, but at some point, if you're not curious at looking what other artists do, and if you're not even, willing to listen to someone else saying, hey, maybe you can learn something like called perspective or anatomy, how to draw. And like, no, this is not my style, man. Like, perspective, it's fascist. I don't want to hear about it, And so, of course, you will be kind of limited. And it's the same way of like, oh, I've always done, I don't know, my lecture this way. And, I'm not going to change. Or I don't need a coach to learn how to play football, You're just going to be limited yourself. And you're not going to be able to completely fulfill or accomplish the capacity that you have within inside you, And the same applies to in a spiritual journey. One goes through a priest, a pastor, or a spiritual master, whatever. And basically, we have to find our shepherd. Just like Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. But of course, that requires effort. We must renounce a part of ourselves. Let the dead bury the dead. Let the dead bury their own dead. But you go and proclaim the kingdom of God. That's why we have to talk about someone we haven't talked about yet, which is Abel. Abel's responsibility. Because Abel is also subject to fallen nature, but he carries a very important responsibility. In fact, Abel has the responsibility to move Cain's heart. And one good example in the Bible is the episode with Jacob and Esau that hug themselves. And there's this true father said in Chung Sang Yong, Abel cannot restore Cain by striking him and forcing him. Abel needs to move Cain's heart to submit voluntarily. Abel needs to show him a new view of the world, a new view of the nation, of life, of the future, of character, and a new lineage and heart. Without saving Cain, you cannot become Abel. And I think what I really like is having to show a new view of the world. I think we all experience this experience of we're full of resentment and frustration, and then suddenly someone comes and be like, man, you're just not seeing this with the right glasses. And suddenly your view of the world completely changed. And I believe that this structure, even on a societal level, it works. In a state governed by the rule of law, his institutions, such as education, law enforcement, healthcare, can be seen as occupying the able position. And their role is to unite citizens in the Cain position, with the state, its constitution and its law, all of which are meant to serve the greater good. This makes it possible to establish a harmonious society in which citizens unite with their institutions, live in mutual trust, experience growth and cooperation, and achieve both personal and collective flourishing. And I think that's why the major problem in our world we're facing today, there's so many, especially in the Western world, so many crises in our societies. And I think it dips down in a crisis of responsibility, because those who occupy able position, the central figure, do not fully, take their responsibility. And maybe it's it's not my fault, it's someone else. And this results, it results in a deep loss of trust in this institution and widespread social instability, etc., etc. So you see, these are also very real consequences. It's not just pure theological stuff that and of course, Abel is not perfect, but it's Cain's role to support him and unite him with his nonetheless. So that's why we need to ask, ourselves, who will I choose as the central figure of my life? With whom will I unite with? Is it going to be myself? Is it going to be this random YouTube influencers? Is it going to be Christ? Is it going to be this guy who tells me that if I eat, pineapple, I'm going to heal from cancer? I mean, who are the person you look to? What is the environment you are growing or living in? Are they guiding you towards a better version of yourself, or you're a destructive one? Those choices we make carry significant consequences in our life. And I mean, a terrible example is one of True Father's children. Look how they change when they start completely not united with mother. It became completely crazy. And the same with the Jew. They did not accept Jesus, and which led to the crucifixion. So final thought. Let us not confuse transcendence with transgression. So the Luciferian belief is that to transcend something is to transgress it. So in a way, self-realization comes through this transgression of the established order. So you see in the Bible, the snake says, "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good from evil." So basically, if you want to be like God, transcendence, if you want to transcend, you must eat the fruit of good and evil, and then therefore you need to transgress, right? And we can see it in our society that idolizes transgression to the point where being transgressive has become like the norm. It embodies the belief that progress comes only through tearing down what has been established. That is, the more we transgress, the more we liberate ourselves from the chains of ingrained moral structure. This is a very good example. This is the #1 French dating website for people who wants to have affairs. And so you have and it's funny because it's called Gleeden, and they actually use the apple as a sign. And you can see he's in the metro. They have postered everywhere, and it's written, here is one of their catchphrases: "At times, staying faithful is precisely how we go wrong." And for me, it's like the perfect embody of that. Or even in art, with aussi Marcel Duchamp, La Fontaine, he just put a pissoir and made it as an art piece. I mean, look, in some ways, there's also truth to it. Like, there's something powerful and exciting about transgression. We break down walls and opens new horizon. But we cannot base a society on this. It is a society that will ultimately destroy itself, I believe. I think the journey towards genuine transcendence, towards freedom and realization of the self, requires humility, the forgetting of self, and union with one central figure. So basically, going completely opposite from Way of the Archangel, right? And I think a really good example of that, this path doesn't mean that we need to deny ourselves completely. On the contrary, walking this path allows us to truly realize ourselves and uncover our full potential. My favorite Beatles is George Harrison. And George Harrison, he comes from blues guitar, he listened to Elvis Presley. This is his musical background, right? But then he met this artist and Ravi Shankar, which was an Indian artist, and through him he learned how to play the sitar, but also he converted into Hinduism, and this had brought the Beatles music in a completely different level. And George Harrison did not just attempt to transgress the instrument, breaking it apart or experimenting, right? He completely was in unity with Ravi Shankar, and intimately enriching his musical palette. And the result is not like he abandoned his root and only started to play Indian music. On the contrary, he became even a greater rock musician, flourishing as an artist and expressing the full depth of his creativity. So I think George Harrison is a perfect example of a good... and it's the same way, it's only when the disciple truly recognizes Jesus and united with him after his death that they received the Holy Spirit. And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." So, understanding the characteristics of the fallen nature and all of this stuff, what I'm trying to say is that it's not just a pure theological thing. I can understand it could be a bit you're reading this and you're like, okay, the archangel having a relationship with Eve. And it can sound a bit washy-washy, but in reality, I believe it holds very deep reality and truth in our life. I think it's a map, that can really show us how to realize ourselves. And okay, this is maybe of a hot take here, but even if you don't believe in true parents, even if you don't believe in God, this structure still applies for you. Because you can replace God by the greatest good or whatever, but if you want to fully realize yourself, you're not going to be able to do it alone. You have to find a person who will help you to get there. And in the same time, at some point in your life, you will also be in the position where you might meet someone and see potential in this person and be like, okay, am I going to help that person grow? So I think it's a very strong truth. So God as a parent desires for the child to surpass themselves and realize their true potential. So to achieve this, we must overcome our fallen nature, and by just love, respect, unite, and do good, and hopefully we will regain our lost paradise. Thank you very much.